Hi folks, it's Wrangler here again, and I'm taking a second look in this video at the AA3000 Plus. So in my first video I looked at that motherboard, which is a replica of the AA3000 Plus motherboard prototype, and I compared it to the actual A3000 motherboard, got it installed in this A3000 that we've got in front of us here, got the software up and running, and a Voodoo 3 graphics card running on PCI, and as you can see it's happily playing Warp 3D here, a little bit slowly, but that's just the nature of the 060 accelerator I've got in the machine right now, but it's looking pretty happy. So why on earth am I doing a second video? And the answer to that is really what I want to do next with this machine, which is try and push it a bit further with the PCI cards, and ultimately, hopefully, getting a PowerPC accelerator working in this machine. And in order to do that, I am going to have to use DMA, direct memory access, between the PCI cards, and as soon as you want to do that kind of thing, then you can bump into a bit of a problem with the Prometheus backplane, which is part of the AA3000 Plus setup. And the issue here is that there are two versions of the firmware in existence. There's the original version, which actually has some problems with DMA, and an upgrade, a refresh of the firmware produced by Michael Burma of E3B and, for example, Deneb fame, an upgraded firmware that can handle DMA between various PCI cards, and that's what I need in order for a PowerPC processor, amongst other applications, to actually work in the A3000 we've got in front of us here. So the issue is then I haven't got the right firmware running. So what this video is about is upgrading that firmware. So first of all, I mean, how do we know which firmware we've got running? So let's come out of this, because it's not immediately apparent necessarily what firmware you've got. The easiest way to tell is to run something like which Amiga or show config and have a look at what boards are coming up, and you can see here I've got the Prometheus as the bottom card listed, and importantly the manufacturer ID here is a MATE1. In the upgraded Firestorm firmware, then the manufacturer ID is the same as this second card, an E3B card here. It would be a 3643, and the product ID would be 200. So this is showing it's the old firmware, the original firmware. I need to upgrade that to the new firmware. So that's what I'm going to do. First thing I've got to do is break down this machine again, get that daughterboard out, and then I can start work on upgrading the firmware. Okay, so I'm back again now with the daughterboard out of the machine. We looked at this in the last video, and you can see a few extra wires are attached, so let's just walk through those briefly. The first one is a traditional sort of Molex connector attached to USB, just to provide the Altera CPLD chips with some power while we're doing this firmware flash. So that's something I've just cobbled together this morning. The other thing is the programmer, which is a USB blaster. I got this off eBay pretty cheaply, so they're quite easy to come by. And then that's plugged into the connector here, and it's really important obviously to get this the right way round. There's a red cable down the side here indicating where pin 1 is, and a 1 actually on the print on the PCB here to get them the right way around. But equally, I've been around with a multimeter and just checked out that this is actually connected the right way around when the configuration's like this. And if you're going to do this, I definitely think that's worthwhile doing. So that's all hooked up. Equally, I've got hold of the Quartus 2 32-bit programmer software here, which is what's required for programming the chips. And I think the next thing to do is just to get this plugged in and going, and I think there is a definite order to do this in. So the first thing is to power the machine up, the CPLDs up via the Molex, and then plug in the programmer. I haven't tried it the other way around, but that's what I have read is a good way to do. And by the way, just before we go any further with this, how do I know what to do here? Well, actually there is a really good blog by a French Amiga user called Cosmos, which has got some instructions that effectively I'm following for upgrading the original Prometheus board. This one by Hesse isn't exactly the same, but is close enough that you can follow Cosmos's instructions. So thanks very much to Cosmos for posting that. It's been a big help in getting this far. So what do we need now? Well, first of all, we've got to select the right hardware here. There's my USB blaster. So let's just add that. Let's not do that. Let's double click that. Yep, so that's now selected and USB blaster is now shown up here. And I can auto detect, and there we have it. It has detected the two CPLD chips on the board. And what in effect I've got to do is identify the firmware file that I want to be uploaded to each of those chips and flash them. Now the difficulty here is that there is no obvious way that I can see for telling the two chips apart, and in Prometheus language one of them's labelled high and one's low, and you need to get the right firmware for the right chip, obviously. So I think the only thing I can do here is just to guess which one is which. So I think I'm going to start by assuming that this one is high and this one is low, but let's just see where that gets us to. So if I click on one of the chips there and change file, that's going to take me to a file requester. Let's see if I can get somewhere sensible. Yes, and I could have done that quicker. So Prometheus, back again, Firestorm. So this is where the new files are. So let's just go through this again a little bit slower. So I have also found the original firmware files, which are these two here according to Cosmos. Let's get these the right way round. So the CH40i file is for the high chip and the CL27 file is for the low chip. That's the original software. Now let's go to the new Firestorm one. Again, it's the CH52i, which is for the high chip, and CL27, which is for the low chip. Now you might notice there that the low chip has a file named CL27 both on the old and the new firmware. Actually, I've done a quick byte comparison of those two files. They are not the same, even though they've got the same name, they are not the same file. So you do need to update both firmware files to the Firestorm software. Right, so I'm going to assume that this first chip on the left here is the high chip, so that means I need that file. I am going to open that and verify, and then do the same thing with the other file. Program configure. That should set me up. So I think the only thing to do now is to click start and kind of cross my fingers as I do that nothing blows up or anything more spectacular than that. So here we go, start. There's a convenient progress bar going up on the top right here. So that is looking kind of promising. We've got to, what, 3/4 almost? So let's just give that a few moments to work its way through. So it's programmed and now moved on to verifying. So again, looking promising. and it's failed. So that is interesting. So I don't exactly know what is going wrong there, given that it seemed to program them and now cannot verify them. Cannot access JTAG chain. Alright, this is going to need a bit of thought. Let me do this offline and work out what the problem is. I must confess I had a bit of a panic after those files failed to verify, and really after thinking about it for a little bit, I thought the only thing I could really do was to put the machine back together and just sort of see what happens. So let's get that going. As ever, it takes a little bit of time to boot up, but I think this will be the only way really to be sure of what's going on and whether I got those two chips the right way round, the high and the low. Power light just flickered there, so actually it is doing its usual double boot thing, so that's a relatively promising sign. But still a bit mysterious that it was unable to verify the two chips, and all seems a little bit odd, so maybe I didn't quite get that right somehow. Anyway, let's see what happens when we boot. By the way, I've plugged the screen back into the native AGA, in this case output, so that's why we're seeing that. So we booted up and that's what we got, is an AGA screen, not our lovely Voodoo screen. So something going a little squiffy here. What does which Amiga think? Well, here are our cards. It's recognising the change in manufacturer and product ID here, so 3643200, that's different to what we had before, and it's showing it as E3B, so Michael Burma Prometheus Firestorm, so that is exactly what we want. So that sounds like progress, and that would seem to suggest actually I did get those chips the right way round. However, what isn't working is this top guard here, which originally was shown as a Voodoo 3, now isn't. So something isn't happy, and equally, if I go into Prefs and Picasso mode, okay, I know it's going off the bottom of the screen here, but it's saying attached to no board. It's actually not able to see the Voodoo 3. So it looks like I've made progress with the firmware, but maybe somewhere along the lines I have got perhaps the Amiga libraries wrong. Now I did update the Prometheus library to version 3, but let's just check that in the middle of all of that I didn't stuff up somehow. So there's version 3 running, 3.0, which is what's required for the Firestorm firmware, so that's okay. I wonder if I can do a scan, so it's not actually seeing any cards, so I don't know, it looks like it's partly working, partly not, so I think I'm going to have a little think about this, bit of diagnosis, try and work out what's going on to make some progress, and I'll report back. Since the last video clip, I've spent quite a lot of time looking around to try and find an answer to the problem that we were encountering there, which is the firmware seems to have flashed properly, but the PCI cards aren't found. And actually, in digging around on various forums, EAB, A1K, that looks like quite a widespread problem. So that also got me in touch with another Amiga user called DK Edrowich, and he has looked into this in more detail, and it turns out actually there are 3 different versions of the firmware, not 2. There's the original Prometheus version that I had originally running on this backplane that doesn't support DMA at all. There's the Firestorm version, which I've just flashed to, which does seemingly fully, and then there's a sort of middle version which was an upgrade by Mate that provides some limited DMA support but also has some issues with it as far as I can tell. That middle firmware doesn't seem to be available anywhere on the net, but might be on people's cards already. Anyway, the issue is we're now on the latest Firestorm firmware, but it doesn't work with the original Prometheus Library, even version 3.0. And however, there was talk on various forums about there being a beta version of the library that does actually work on the new firmware. So just as I was beginning to despair that I would ever find this beta firmware, actually Rutzelhoffel, hopefully pronounced that right, posted it on A1K, which I have just downloaded onto the compact flash card here. So, you know, let's just see how this goes. Will this be what we're looking for to get the new firmware up and running properly? So first of all, where have I put all my Prometheus files? In the Prometheus drawer, yeah, that would be a good idea. So here's the new archive file, so let's just put that straight into libs. And let's get that renamed properly. So they're the various libraries that I've been trying. The current one here is actually 3.0, so let's just rename that just in case I ever need to get back to it, which is what I try to remember to do. So that's that, and then switch out, rather switch in the Prometheus 3.1 library to be the current Prometheus library. Okay, so in theory that should get the right library version in place. So let's just restart, give that a chance to reboot, and hopefully that will now be the right library version to work with the new firmware, give us what we need. Okay, we're back in Workbench. I think the first thing I am going to do here actually is not that, is let's just do a PRM scan, and now that is excellent sign, we actually are seeing the Voodoo card. So fantastic, first signs are really good there. Not quite sure why it's saying board driver none, but let's just carry on regardless for now in the time-honoured tradition. First thing I'm going to do actually is get this screen looking a bit better, because it's pretty crappy right now, and I know from past experience I am going to run into trouble if I don't sort this out right now. In fact, let's just save that. Give us a bit more resolution. When you get into setting up Picasso 96, really you need the extra screen height, or the requesters don't really fit on the screen very well. So let's try that. No board. So again, progress, but not everything that we need. So where does that take us? Alright, this is going to need a little bit more thinking about to really work out what I need to do from here, but at least we are getting some sort of visibility of the PCI cards in the system. Alright, more thinking, more research required, and I'll be back once I've figured it all out. Many hours have passed since the last clip, and I've spent pretty much all that time trying to get to the bottom of this issue about software, and I think I might be making some progress at last, having followed a number of false leads and dead ends. So what is it all about? Well, it's this: if you upgrade the Prometheus firmware to the latest Firestorm design by Michael Burmer, then that enables DMA. But in order to take advantage of that, you need to change several software layers sitting above the firmware. First, there's Prometheus Library. The latest official version of that, I think, was version 2.5. There is a version 3.0 kicking around the internet in places, but even that isn't enough for the Firestorm firmware. You have to go to version 3.1. Even when you've done that, that's not enough, because sitting on top of those layers are the Picasso 96 drivers, and a video card is required really to get anything else working on the PCI bus. So that's the next port of call. What I have done is to replace the Picasso 96 drivers with updated versions, and the giveaway here is that they are different file sizes to the ones that generally ship with Picasso 96. So these are the two new files that are relevant for me: Prometheus.card and 3DFX voodoo.chip. Let's just check the file sizes of those. So Prometheus.card 4656 bytes, 3DFX voodoo chip 28852. Those are different to the ones that you might normally get. So armed with the new Firestorm firmware, version 3.1 of the library, and the correct Prometheus.card and 3DFX.chip files, where do we get to? Well, let's just turn that off and have a look at a scan of the bus, and at last we're seeing 3DFX voodoo.chip recognised here as the board driver, so much more promising. While we're at it, let's just have a look at what openpci.info says. I can't immediately see anything that looks different there from when we had that open before, but equally it's not throwing any errors either. That gives me some confidence now that when I go into Picasso 96 mode, I am actually going to get the chance to connect to a board. So here's the moment of truth. Is there anything there? Yes, there is. So this is new. We've got a board to connect to. Let's just save and reboot, and it does the usual thing of inserting a pause just to make sure all the disk activity is finished. So done. Okay, let's go. Wait for this machine to go through its somewhat lengthy boot cycle and see if we can link up any of those voodoo modes via screen mode. If we can, then effectively we've got back to where we started right at the start of this this video. But it ought to leave the door open now for other developments making use of DMA. Okay, back at Workbench, press screen mode, and here we're beginning to see Prometheus. Did that say Voodoo before? I can't remember, but anyway, let's pick a 16-bit PC mode, and let's just use, because again I've got to run around the back, switch over the cables. I might not do that all in time for a test, which gives you a fairly limited timeout before it switches back. So let's just use, yes, it doesn't like me doing that, but let's just go for it and see what happens. Cable switched, the monitor light is on, so that's a good sign, and there we have it. So actually that does work, and we are back in retargetable graphics space. So I'm going to save that video mode straight away. Let's just have a quick look at DMA list. Now, did I put that in my C directory? I did. Now, so no free DMA found. Now that's interesting. Perhaps I need to set the appropriate envarc to get some DMA memory, but at least it would appear that we're making some progress now. Let me have a look into this DMA memory point a little bit further and then do an update. Luckily, not too much time has passed since the last clip. I managed to work out what was going wrong pretty quickly thanks to a tip-off by Trickster, a mate of mine. What you've got to do is to go into the monitor driver for Prometheus here and go into the tool types and set an extra tool type called DMA size. So in this case I've set 2 megabytes as the DMA size. Apparently you can go up to 8 megabytes, but 2 seems fine to begin with. If you set that going, then let's just see what we got. So first of all, just to run through this, we've got the Firestorm showing in our list of cards. We have got the DMA list showing up there now with our 2 megs. And if we just do a quick look at Open PCI info, you see down here these entries weren't here before, but they're all about DMA allocations. So that all seems to be working exactly as it should do. So all good signs. I think the other thing it remains to do is just check that the Gears demo that I was running right at the start of this video still works. And there it is. Is that a bit faster than it was before? I don't know, maybe it's my eyes deceiving me. It just seems to be a little bit quicker perhaps than before. I think the final thing to do here is perhaps to get another card in this machine, perhaps a network interface card, something like that. The 8139 chip requires DMA as far as I know, so that will be a test that the thing is actually doing what it should do, and I've actually moved forward the capabilities of this machine compared to where I started. So maybe that's my next task then, get a network interface card in here, or maybe a USB card, see if I can get that working as a final test DMA. What I've done now is to add in a PCI Ethernet card into the system. We can just check that that's showing up here. So not only the Voodoo that we had before, but now the RT8139 is in there, showing no driver because I haven't installed that yet, but the fact that it's just picked up in the PCI card list is progress. So next step then, let's install the driver, which is in here along with everything else to do with Prometheus. And we've got it in zip, so let's just actually not do that, let's just send it straight to RAM. And install that. Right, so it would appear there isn't a direct installer. Did that do anything? I don't know. Let's just open it the old-fashioned way. Okay. So we need config file, do we? Alright. So I think all we have to do is copy the driver over into the devs directory and point things in the right places, and at least that will get us going. I mean, it may not be quite running at full duplex and all the rest of it, but at least it will just prove that we are doing the right kinds of things. Right, get it together. start looking in the right places. Devs networks, come on, where are you? There we go. Okay, so that's the driver in the right place. Let's start now getting to work with Genesis, which is what I tend to use for TCP/IP. I copied this entire installation from another machine which was already set up to use the internet, which is quite handy. So in theory, the only thing I need to do now is to point it at the new device, save, and in principle this should now work. The Ethernet card is already plugged into the local area network I've got here, so click that. Using default auto config, okay, that's fine. So aside from a couple of warnings, it does seem to have connected to something. In the time-honoured fashion, here's a web that I opened up earlier. Let's, for the sake of argument, go and look at AmiNet. Can it open? And it would appear that yes, it can. And we've got a date here. That's an old date. That's no, so that was the cache file, and now it's opened up the real file. The 9th of February 2020, which is today, as a matter of fact. So that is opening up and working as intended. So there we go. I think that shows that this setup is now working properly, and as I said before, I think the 8139 based LAN cards only work if DMA is working, so I think that demonstrates that this is doing what it should be doing. So there we have it. I might go on to have a look at USB if that's possible in this machine, but probably not for this video. Otherwise, I think that brings us to a conclusion. So with a lot of effort over drivers and flashing firmware, it is possible to get the Prometheus card, and specifically the backplane in the AA3000 Plus, working with the latest versions, and moreover using DMA to control the PCI cards, and that opens up all sorts of other possibilities, some of which don't exist yet, to use greater variations, to get greater range of hardware in the Amiga. Hope you've enjoyed watching, and keep a lookout for the next video. This is Wrangler signing out.